Anderson, I don't usually hold out a lot of hope for what President Trump does, but I actually had hoped that he would do something substantive today. But he seems to get in his own way, even in rolling out this order. He doesn't mention race, he doesn't mention bias, and then he went on some rambling tirade about school choice. And so it's difficult to take him seriously. I was glad to see the national database. I do think that is an important step, but there's so much more to be done. And there was so much left undone from the plan that President Obama and Vice President Biden left on 21st century policing. And so in Atlanta and cities across this country, as always, we're still trying to figure it out on our own. But even in Atlanta, we thought that we had 14 days at least for recommendations from our advisory task force on use of force policies. And not even 3 days into the convening of our task force, we had the killing of Rayshard Brooks. And so we can't wait any longer. And we have to continue to push forward with policies in the same way we've done in Atlanta. But the reality is that it still won't bring this father back.
Some of the things that activists have pointed to is getting rid of qualified immunity for police officers is obviously a very controversial issue, and also having more community involvement or even separate community determination of who the commanders are in a particular community. A former police officer who's the president of Brooklyn, he's the Brooklyn borough president here, Eric Adams, he's recommended communities actually being able to vote on the three choices put forward by the city on who should be a commanding officer in a district. I'm wondering what do you make of the idea of more community involvement?
I think community involvement is always helpful, but I think you have to look at it city by city and make determinations in that regard. But at the end of the day, again, going back to the plan for 21st century policing, it was very clear our police officers are to be guardians and not warriors in our communities. There is supposed to be a partnership with our communities, and that trust has been broken across the country. And it's unfortunate because we know that law enforcement plays an important role in our communities. In Atlanta, they're volunteering with our kids at our At Promise youth centers and our police athletic leagues. So there are some positive relationships happening. But then when the worst happens, like it did in Atlanta on Friday, and when you look at what happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and so many names that I can't even list them, it tells you that the trust is broken and we've got to rebuild and reimagine and transform how we are policing in our communities across this country.
Again, though, I mean, how is there, is that a training issue? Is it, a lot of protesters are talking about defunding police, calling for defund police, and I know you and I have talked about that before. Is that something you would even consider?
Well, I think it's much more complicated than simply defunding a police department. And I've shared this with you before, Anderson. When I look at our police budget, I'm looking at pensions, I'm looking at salaries, capital costs, and workers' compensation. I don't have a lot of fluff embedded into our police budget, but we are reimagining our corrections budget. We have already transferred 60% of our corrections budget towards community-based programming and personnel, and we're closing down our jail in Atlanta, turning it into a center of equity, wellness, and health. And so I think that you've got to look at where you're trying to go and then figure out how to get there. What people are saying is we want more money towards our communities. We want to make sure that there's money left over for our community centers and for community programming. And I think that's an important conversation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to come out of a police budget line item, because that just may not be the practical way to achieve what we're all trying to achieve.